ones, whether we have to take action on them?
We don't have to do that.
Do we even have to read it that we don't have to, or?
No, you can just say the first one is to hear reports.
Okay.
It's not-
Okay. And, thank you.
This conference will now be recorded.
Hey, good evening, everybody. It's the Auburn Finance Committee. Today is October 4th, 2023, 6:30 p.m. We're here at the Auburn Town Hall in the Select Board's meeting room. I'm going to read our remote participation script. This open meeting of the Town of Auburn Finance Committee is being conducted both in person and remotely, consistent with Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, which suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of the public bodies are allowed to participate remotely as long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. For the public to join the meeting remotely by telephone, 1-786-535-3211 with an access code of 991-599-357, or the public can join via computer by going to globalgotomeeting.com. They can join with the access code of 991-599-357. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. All members of the Finance Committee are present tonight, so we do not need to do a roll call vote of anybody that is participating remotely, and all members of the, I don't believe we have any members, department heads or otherwise appearing remotely either, so everyone is present, and we should be able to move forward. Tonight's agenda, we just had our call to order. First on our agenda is a review of the upcoming town meeting warrant articles. We do not have any transfer requests this evening that have been submitted, nor minutes. And that is it. So it's just the warrant articles for tonight. Thank you for everybody for taking time to be here, as well as our department heads that are present. So we'll move right into the warrant articles. Mr. Kaznovich, Town Manager, anything you want to do in the way of...
Sure, I'd like to provide the Finance Committee a summary of the requests that are being made for the fall town meeting. So Article 2 is a general fund operating budget. The total request for all the items is $495,453. Of that, it is being recommended that $307,304 would come from general fund revenue, $163,149 from ambulance receipts, and $25,000 from Packagug Enterprise account. The remaining articles, 4 through 22, total request of $1,495,150. Of that, $101,250 is being requested from general fund revenue, $80,000 from SOAR Enterprise, $1,102,331.19 requested from free cash, $208,468.81 from available funds, and $3,100 from perpetual care. In terms of free cash, we just received our certification on September 29th. Department of Revenue certified our free cash at $21,363,298. According to our free cash policy, we're allowed to appropriate 50% of the net gain from the prior fiscal year for one-time expenditures and not to be used as a general fund operating revenue offset. That being said, the net gain from the prior fiscal year is $2,576,555. 50% of that is $1,288,277.50. We are only requesting $1,102,000, so roughly about $180,000 less than what we're allowed to request under the 50% policy. When we look at our total revenue sources that we projected at the annual town meeting, our local receipts, we amended by $307,000. Motor vehicle excise, things of that nature. Investment income was up significantly, about $100,000 over the prior fiscal year, because our rate of return now is greater than what it was a year ago. In some cases, we're getting up to 5% return on our investment. Cherry sheet revenue, dead even, no gain, no loss. Tax levy, because of our conservative approach on estimating new growth, we estimated 500. We're expecting to get about 625, so it's about $125,000 gain on new growth. Debt exclusion, no gain, no loss, and available funds, primarily made up of free cash, is $1,577,049 gain. If this warrant is to be approved as presented, the level of taxation that we would recognize is about 1/20th of 2.5. So out of 2.5%, we'd be taxing at a rate of 0.53 out of 2.5. Our 2.5 value is about 1.3 million. We'd be taxing about 278,000 of the 1.3. So our excess levy would grow by about $1 million. It's currently at about 8.2 million. That would put us at about 9.3 million of excess levy. So certainly, once again, we're taxing minimally, like we have for the past 12 years. That's a good thing for the taxpayers of our community. Unfortunately, that's good news. The residential home values are going up by about 11%. So all things being equal, because the residential value is going up, there may be a slight increase in taxation, even though we're holding the line on 2.5.
Anybody have any questions for Patrick?
Thank you. Through the chair, I just wanted to clarify on the interest for the treasury. You said we're up about 100,000. I'm just curious of the available receipts that are being invested at the good return that we have. Would you say, because it's pretty liquid, that mostly 90, 80, or 100% of it is invested in treasury, or is it percent lower than that?
So I don't know the mix offhand. I can tell you our cash balance is averaging about 75 million, and that's done. That cash balance is available for a number of reasons. One, our free cash, which is about 21. Our OPEB, which is about 8 million. Our health insurance trust was about 12 million. Our what other investments do we have? Our other trust funds. So we have a very healthy cash balance. I can't tell you how much of that is liquid, but I can tell you that most of our OPEB and things that don't need to be liquid are invested in a long term to maximize our return.
I just asked because I wasn't actually taking into account OPEB or the IAC. It was just more the regular treasury receipts, because I think, like you said, we're getting a good return on that, and I would think that you could put most of that away.
Yeah.
And then if you were to need it, you'd have readily access to it. It's not like we're committed to 6 months or a year down the road. It's more liquid than that.
So I said a good portion of our general fund cash is
Invested.
It's invested, yes.
Perfect.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Steve?
Two questions. On the free cash, you said we could take 50% of the gain per year. So what happens to the rest of it? I mean, that just sits there?
It's
You don't spend it?
It increases our free cash balance.
So the second part, my second question is, the home values went up 11% is the basis. So wouldn't that mean that taxes went up 11% as well? If the whatever you're multiplying the value by, if the value goes up, wouldn't people's bottom line payment go up 11% as well?
So Yes, I think all things being equal, it all depends on the condition of the house, the location of the house, the type of housing, or whatever. Blended overall, I mean, condos may be different than residential homes, multifamilies may be different than residential homes, different than condos. But I could tell you, and you're gonna see this across the board, residential home values are increasing at a higher rate than commercial and industrial values.
This is one of the things I've always questioned about Prop 2.5, which is that we say we're not increasing the rate, when in fact we're charging more because we're saying the house, people living in the house, the price hasn't gone up. It's only the person buying a house. The person living in the house is
Well,
living in the
typically-
same house. It's the same value to them.
I think it all depends on the level of expense that we're adding to the annual operating budget. So, all things being equal, as values go up, tax rates go down.
Revenue for the town is going up because you're actually taxing it, you're collecting more revenue.
If we were to raise the same revenue without increasing the operating budget, then the rate would go down.
If the rate, we got two different things. You get the tax rate and the.
I'm saying
property
rates
value.
per $1,000 of value.
So we never tax at the old rate.
The rate,
The assessed value. The assessed value is, the Proposition 2.5 says you can't change this percentage. The other side of the equation has no limit on it. There's no Proposition 3%, whatever the cost of living increases. There's nothing that says you can't double the price of home values.
you can only increase your levy by 2.5% per year, plus the value of the new growth. There's a cap on that.
On the total revenue.
That's the premise of 2.5.
On the total revenue, not just the, okay. So that's what I was trying
Yeah.
to clarify, because that doesn't make sense. I'm not sure how you make this math work, but we could talk about that separately. Because if the house's values are going up 11%, and you're only going up 1/20th of, actually, it's not 1/20th of 1%, it's
There's a shift in taxation. So there's more of a shift towards the residential because the values are going up. If it went the other way, if commercial and industrial values went up, residential went down, then the level of taxation is going to be higher on the commercial and industrial on an annual growth basis.
Any additional questions? Just to follow up on Steve's thing, and I think, I think that is a big concern you see on social media is, people, my taxes have gone up, my taxes have gone up. Can you just remind me exactly, so you said typically houses have gone up 11%, but how often do we reevaluate or assess home values? Because we seem to be hitting a plateau, things seem to be kind of leveling out, if not coming down a little bit in value. So can you just remind me how that works?
It used to be a 5-year cycle. DOR would come in and certify your values every 5 years, and what they call interim adjustments during every other year, based upon sales, based upon a number of criteria. They now changed that to 3. So we have to have a full review by DOR on our values every 3 years. This year is actually the certification year. So what I will show in the future is our level of taxation as it compares to other Central Mass communities. And the indicator is your level of excess levy, okay? So excess levy tells you that communities are not taxing to the max. This year, and I just did an analysis on this, out of about 15 communities, we have the highest excess levy in Central Massachusetts, and that includes all of the bordering communities and some of the ones on the outskirts. We're at about 9.3. The community closest to us is Northborough. They're at 4.7, okay? All other communities, Charlton just has $420 of excess levy, so By examining that, we know they're going to 2.5 every year, 2.5 every year. And most communities are. So that's something we'll be presenting to you probably during the next budget presentation, just to give you a sense as to how we are saving the taxpayers of this community. We, over the last 12 years, about $67 million that we would have been allowed to tax that we didn't tax. That would have drove the tax rate up around $20 per thousand. We're currently at 15 per thousand. You got to remember that 15 also includes 2 debt overrides, one for the high school, one for the middle school. If you back that off, you know, people saying the level of taxation is too high here in Auburn. That is not the case, and I would dispute that. But secondly, there are 2 overrides that are driving that tax rate as well.
Patrick?
I just want to clarify, he made an important statement that I think could have been easily missed, and that's the recertification years every 3, and that's by the DOR. So it's not only that a city or a town, which Auburn is, that we're going and reviewing these taxes and adjusting our bills, but it's also an exercise that is mandated by the state. So it's not like we can just miss a year, and what they do sometimes is, in some municipalities, they do a portion of the demographics, but every 3 years, that recertification means they have to touch every property. Just to give you a little bit of insight and to clarify an important statement that you made, that it's important for the board to understand that some of the exercises and ordinances that we follow are not just mandated or chosen because we live in Auburn and we can make that choice, but because they're controlled by a much greater force. I wanted to point that out.
Yeah, just to follow up, I mean, again, we have a couple of new members, and I think it's important that we lay the groundwork before we start talking about making recommendations for stuff that impacts, you know, the residents. That, can you just, you know, of all the things you just put out there, you know, overall health, you just mentioned one aspect, but, you know, in terms of like our ratings, if we were to go out and borrow for things, you know, where we stand with that. And then sometimes, I think people forget when they make those comparisons between our community and another community with level of taxes, if you compare the level of services they're getting in some of these communities, still with on-call fire departments and, you know, schools where their kids are readily looking to school choice and to other communities. So we are very fortunate in the level of services, and, you know, certainly we could come down in the taxes, but the level of services people would see would be severely affected. So could you just briefly touch on where we are? I mean, overall health, if we, you know, bond ratings and we have things of that nature.
Our overall financial position is very, very strong, indicative by our rating of a AA+ by Standard & Poor's, which is one shy of a perfect rating. So, unfortunately, our wealth factors come into play. Our wealth factors are not AAA standard, okay? So, as well as we're doing on the financial side of things, the wealth factors are holding us back from a AAA rating. And we've had this argument with Standard & Poor's over the years. We developed financial policies that put us in this financial position that were adopted not only by the Finance Committee, but by the Board of Selectmen back in 2012. That really set the stage and the roadmap for where we are today, and we're very thankful for that. And that's translated to savings by incurring long-term debt at a lower interest rate. For instance, when we went out and borrowed for the high school, we were not at a AA+, but we refinanced those bonds. There's a callable period in year 8. We refinanced those bonds for the duration of the term, and we saved the taxpayers of the community $3+ million by refinancing. The refinancing option is probably going to come more into play now that we're paying a higher rate on our borrowing. The interest rates now, they continue to go up. And so we're probably going to look at another year of short-term borrowing, hoping that the rates are going to retreat and come back a little bit, because we're paying a lot more for funds that we borrow. And we're trying not to borrow. We're trying to minimize our borrowing as best we can.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Steve?
I'm just curious, the free cash was 21 million. How much do we borrow? And why can't we use that as a fund for our borrowing instead of borrowing?
Because
Paying interest with one hand and trying to collect it with the other.
Because the rating agencies will see that as a deterioration of your reserves, okay? And as a result of that, they may downgrade you, and it would increase the rate.
Increases the rate to borrow, right?
So typically, the rating agencies want to see a percentage of reserves as it relates to the general fund operating budget. I can tell you back in the day, it used to be 5% to 8%. That bar keeps getting elevated, and right now, we're at 39%, and they want to see a higher percentage of reserves as it relates to the operating budget. So we keep chasing this bar, and it's done that way for a number of reasons. Number one, I think they see a lot of communities rely on their reserves to fund their operating budget, and they try to put a negative connotation on that. But secondly, there's a major liability out there that most communities not funding, and it's called OPEB. And it's about $59 million, so they want to see that being addressed. It doesn't adversely right now impact our rating or our annual audit, but it may in the future. I think pretty soon you're going to see a mandate to fund that. But we've been proactive and we fund that on an annual basis by the tune of about $600,000.
How much do we normally carry for debt? Separate, I mean, we've got debt on the, which I assume on the, I forget I was reading it, but I assume the debt that I saw as a line item was the schools. But you're talking about debt as like an operating debt.
So
money's
the
coming in
rating
slower
agencies look at debt in two different ways. They exclude the debt exclusion because it was approved by the voters. But the normal debt, they do a ratio on. I think we're at about 2.8 or 3.5%, somewhere in that vicinity, which is a very acceptable rate. The debt exclusion does not become part of the debt ratio calculation.
Ed, would you mind sharing the financial policies for the for the town with this committee? We have some new members. I don't know if that's like a public thing or if not, but
It is published, and we will get you a set, since we have new members, I will distribute those financial policies to you, although they were adopted in 2012, they reflect old benchmarks, they really need to be updated and voted by the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen. But we have many different financial policies. We have an investment financial policy, we have a free cash policy, we have a stabilization policy, we have an OPEB policy. And these policies set a benchmark, although those benchmarks are much higher, that allows us to build it into the operating budget and make it part of an annual consideration that helps us increase those reserves, make them healthy, and puts us in a better financial standing with the rating agencies.
Any other questions, general questions, before we get into me reading all of this? Okay, just for our new members, so as we go through the warrant articles, as a finance committee, we make recommendations to the town meeting, basically. So as listed, when they see them, they'll see what our recommendations were as a committee. And we have 4 different motions that we can take on these. I'll read through them all the way through, so we have them all on the record, and then we'll look for a motion. The motions are either 1, and they're listed on your agenda for the day, recommend approval, 2, not recommend approval, 3, defer to the petitioner, or 4, to take no position at this time and make a recommendation at town meeting. That's usually if there's some information that we don't have or a number that we don't have yet because it's still being worked out, we can save it for the night of and take a position on that night. So we'll get through it. If you have any questions as we go, please, again, ask away. So Article 1 is just the hearing the report. We don't need to address that. That is just
Don't we have to make a motion, though, to defer to the petitioner? We
I
can't
don't
just
think on
pass by
Article
it,
1, I think
right?
we,
We don't have to take it.
Have to take a position? Okay. No motion, then.
okay. Article 2. And Sharon, do I have to read all the line items if they come from?
You don't have to, I mean, everybody has it. but-
Okay. So I'm not going to bother reading the actual account numbers they come from, but to see if town meeting will vote to amend Article 3 of the May 2nd, 2023 annual town meeting as follows. The first one, the volunteer recognition account from $0 to $800. Increase the line for the town audit from $27,000 to $35,000. To increase the line for the professional services from $22,000 to $25,000. To increase advertising from $3,200 to $5,700. To increase the reserve fund from $250,000 to $275,000. To increase salary wage from $60,000 to $80,000. The conference meeting certifications account from $4,000 to $6,500. Increase the conference and meetings account from $50 to $2,050. To increase the equipment maintenance from $27,000 to $32,000. To increase patrol from $2,337,005 to $2,400,450. To add a new line item, body cam storage from $0 to $16,000. To increase the firefighters line from $3,299,247 to $3,442,255. To increase the fire overtime from $300,000 to $380,000. To increase fire protective gear from $50,000 to $70,000. To increase fire clothing uniforms from $36,000 to $39,200. To add a new line item titled Sidewalk/Pedestrian Safety from $0 to $50,000. Increase line item Fleet Maintenance Motor Vehicle Repair from $260,000 to $310,000. To increase the line item Cemetery Gas from $3,500 to $4,500. To increase the line item Contingency from $25,000 to $50,000. To increase the line item for contracted services from $144,012 to $219,012. To decrease the line item for group health from $8.5 million to $8.4 million. To increase the available funds ambulance reserve for appropriation account from $1,504,000 to $1,667,149. And further to approve and amend fiscal year 2024 budget for the town of Auburn of $76,207,136 or act on anything relative thereto. As placed by the town manager.
I'll make a motion to approve, and I just want to make a statement that I believe we knew this was coming. We were concerned and conservative when we set the budget, and you said that you wanted to get a better understanding of what was going to come through for certified cash and so forth, so we sort of knew this was coming.
Before any questions, before we just take the motion, do we have anybody that has questions on anything in
Okay,
particular?
sure.
I think that's probably the best instead of,
Okay, I wasn't sure which, the questions first or the motion, so.
we'll probably ask some questions and then
Okay.
I think that's probably the best way to go. Sir.
Track my motion then.
Specifically to the patrol line and the increase to the firefighters line, it looks like it's like $70,000, maybe $60,000 for patrol and 140-ish for firefighters. Are those new positions? I know that when we initially did the budget, we talked about, I think both departments were looking for new positions, and we didn't recommend them given the financial outlook, but
So, a great question. So, I could tell you they are new positions. If you recall, when we presented the budget for police, we made a recommendation for one. They asked for two. They wanted a
School and road.
resource officer and a traffic enforcement officer. The priority at the time was an SRO, and they were torn on that. And we said, we will revisit in the fall. Given the level of taxation, given the increase in local receipts that we were allowed to make an adjustment on, we believe that, and we prioritize that as a need. And we now are asking for an additional patrolman to start on January 1. So we're picking up 6 months of that obligation. In terms of fire, and I know the chief is on, he can chime in at any time. If you've been following along the board of selectmen's position as it relates to opera, they've been approving money for the impact shifts. And so the board voted to approve another $80,000 some odd dollars that would get them to the end of town meeting, knowing that town administration more likely than not was going to make a recommendation to address that, and we have. So there are 4 new positions, firefighter positions, being requested under Article 2 with a start date of January 1. Discussions with the chief allowed us to revisit the ambulance proceeds. 12 of the current firefighters are being funded through ambulance proceeds. As the department is growing, we needed to revisit how much of that is ambulance related. So we're adding 2 to that. So 2 of those positions, wages, benefits, and gear is being picked up out of ambulance proceeds. Call volume is up, we're getting more money in ambulance proceeds. We have the money to absorb that. The other 2 we're picking up through general taxation, 6 months of which is included in this request.
To follow up on that then, I'll start with Chief Coleman. With these 4 additional positions, where does that get us on the shift, like, coverage? I know you've got a long-term plan to try to have a certain number of on-duty firefighters. So I'm curious where these 4 positions get us in terms of the plan, and whether there are more positions envisioned in the future, or if this 4 is at least short-term capping us out.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Good evening to the committee. So, as the chairman had said, knowing that there are a few new members, I just want to go backwards and recap 1 second. In last year, the department had a staffing study by an outside firm, Municipal Resources, Inc., or MRI, came in, did a comprehensive staffing study of the department, and that report was presented to the board in July of 2022. At the time that the report was done, we were at 9 members per shift. The report, in its conclusion, recommended and stated that we should be at 13 per group. They recommended that at least to the level of 12 should be done as soon as possible, with that 13th position being, fit in, sort of at some point down the road. So over the last 2 years, if you recall, both taking place, amending the budget in October for January 1 starts, both the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, along with town meeting, supported moving the group from 9 to 10. These 4 positions will move the groups from 10 to 11. And then it would be our intention that we're going to continue down this path until ultimately the goal of 13 per group is reached. What I do think is important to note from a finance side, as the town manager said, is that we're comfortable that even if let's fast forward a year and say we're in this position again in October of 2024. We believe that our the level of our ambulance receipts will be able to absorb another 2 positions. So if this was successful and we go from 12 to 14, we believe that the ambulance receipts will be able to support going from 14 to 16, with the levy picking up the additional 2. But what it is important to recognize, and we're sort of, sometimes when we're in these meetings and we talk about things that are going to be coming down the road in the future, or, in some respects, 5 years seems like a long time away. And then next thing you know, it's here. And that's the case with the 40B housing project on Blaker Street. In some respects, it seems like yesterday that we started talking about this, but it seemed like it was a long time away. But all the foundations for that 40B housing project are in. They're starting to throw lumber on those housing projects, and they're expecting to have 1 building erected every 45 days until the completion, and at least until all of those buildings are erected and they can start working inside. So it's coming fast at this point. And why I raise that issue is, I know many of you were not on the committee 5 years ago when we talked about this 40B housing project. But when that project was going on, I was the department head that was probably the loudest and at the forefront in terms of talking about the impacts that 320 unit housing development was going to have, on the department. And, outside of schools, which we don't know what that impact is, right? That's an impact that's not known until those units are lived in, and we know what the demographic and the family makeup is of those units in terms of how they're going to impact the schools. But outside of the school system, there is not one department in this town that is affected as much as the fire rescue department when we talk about those 320 housing units. The way that those buildings are constructed and how they're with the multi-unit setup, those buildings are going to require annual inspection by code. We have to remember they're private development, so they're not plowed by our DPW. The building inspector, they'll be in, it's a one and done. We'll be in there on an annual basis. But I had presented that those developments are going to bring, at a minimum, an additional 100 calls a year to our department. And that may not sound like a lot, but for an agency that's already doing, 18 to 20 emergency calls in a 24-hour period, one more call every 3 days, it adds up. So there is an impact to the department. And at the time, 5 years ago, and the town manager, him and I had conversations on this many years ago, and he was 100% right when he said it. And this isn't the only project that he said it and he was correct on. But, in municipal government, every time we're looking to expend funds, it's great if we can have a revenue source that comes in and supports that. And we have to remember that this 40B housing project is going to bring in somewhere between 1.1, 1.2 million. And that was 5 years ago. So we have to remember now, 5 years later, in the very beginning of your meeting, you were talking about housing and the escalation of housing. So the property values on that may even be greater than the 1.1, 1.2 that was discussed 5 years ago. But that's 1.1, we'll call it, $1 million of new revenue that's coming to the town. And I had advocated 5 years ago to say, when we were talking about those buildings coming in, that was a great opportunity to leverage $300,000 out of that 1.1 to support the department that is ultimately going to be affected the most by those housing units coming in. So it's a great question that you had, and it goes towards what the long-term strategy is. The long-term strategy ultimately is to get us to what that report has recommended at this time, which is 13. We understand it's going to take a few years to get there. We fully understand that. But I think it's important for the town, the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee to understand that it's somewhat been a long-term strategy, knowing that when these 40B housing projects are coming to fruition and they come online, that is a new revenue source that can be used to support the departments that are going to be affected by that. I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions for the fire chief while he's on relative to those positions, or? Deputy Chief Mills, did you want to discuss the additional police position?
Good evening. Welcome, new members.
Thank you.
So, which identified, the difference is $63,445. It is essentially, it's a portion of that is a half year, as the town manager said, and there's some other impact with the body cam program that's hopefully going to be starting on time in January. We just received, there's like an article later on, but we just received a grant for $93,000, a little over $93,000 for the body cameras, so we're in the process of getting that done. But the SRO position is already in place right now. The SRO's been working since the beginning of, since the beginning of the school year. So this would be essentially just backfilling that position into patrol, provided that we can get them into an academy and identify that person. So,
Question? Just quickly, so is it just a backfill for the school resource, or is it traffic specific? I heard that mentioned from the town manager. And if it's traffic specific, is that need there, is increasing crashes and complaints of motor vehicle violations, is that?
I don't know if it's going to be doable this fiscal year, but I know that is one of those that the chief has had, is to increase. We have one traffic officer currently, and we haven't seen a drastic increase in crashes, but day in and day out, whether it's through social media or email, or the recurring complaint from citizens is traffic enforcement. You know, the volume of it, obviously, but every single day we get requests for traffic enforcement. You know, some of the speed limits in town are in flux or being changed, and that will require some, you know, both educational and enforcement type situations. But you know, this chief has definitely prioritized, you know, schools and school safety and communications, like the communications department, but communications internally as well. And then traffic enforcement has always been something that's been very important to him, and it's equally important in the community. We hear that, and we're trying to address it as best we can. But as the town manager said, the priority was the schools, you know, initially, when we had to pick. So that was, so Officer McCarthy, Randy McCarthy is the second SRO right now. And him and Officer O'Brien split duties, and they're, you know, as far as which schools they're assigned to. So we had to pull him out of, you know, patrol, so that's where it came from. So we put that in that position.
Thank you. Any questions for the Deputy Chief? Any other questions in general relative to this article, for Article 2?
I have one on the group health. What happened that we went down? Did we cover ourselves in the spring, and now we didn't get as much of an increase we want? It's rare that health costs go down, so.
Oh, on the group health? On the group health going down 100,000.
So there was a change in the way they treated the teachers' summer pay, and we took the summer pay hit against health insurance in this fiscal, in the last budget. When normally it would be, so there's roughly 3 weeks of savings that we're gonna realize in the current fiscal year.
Thank you.
Any other questions relative to Article 2? Do we have a motion on this one, then?
Motion to approve?
There'll be motion to, it's recommend is.
Recommend, motion to recommend.
Motion to recommend. And a second? All in favor? Aye. Okay, Article 3. To see if the town meeting will vote to designate Whitman Bailey Drive as a public road and maintain it in accordance with standards that apply to all other roads in Auburn. This includes the abutting sidewalks as well as all sewage and utility services contained therein or act on anything relative thereto. And this is by a citizen's petition.
Motion to defer to the petitioner? No questions?
Just questions, while it's, on its face, it appears to not have a financial
Right,
impact.
there's no financial,
But long-term, there is it's another, I see we have the DPW director here. Do you mind just, is this I don't know if I've recalled seeing one of these in recent years.
Good evening. So we typically, we've had some street acceptances in the past. This is a little bit different, just because this was approved by Planning Board, I believe, maybe 2016, somewhere around there. The contractor or the applicant had submitted some plans for a subdivision, and then there was the typical approval process, but then subsequently they came back and made some revisions to the plans, and they came back with making the subdivision a private subdivision. So there were a few things that were waived with respect to the design standards. So the width of the pavement, the depth of the pavement was reduced, curbing was reduced. So I'm just speaking on the DPW's part. Not really, I know that the town planner also had some concerns about this, but, so this is not really a typical street acceptance, because it does still pose some, it has some deficiencies.
This is the one off of Prospect, correct? And this one rings a bell with me because at the time they were going to build single-family homes, and I had looked and talked to and then they went a different direction because I think they were not going to meet certain standards for roadway width and other things so I was surprised to see it now on here, but I guess if it's a citizen's petition, it gets on there. But, so this will be spoken to, will the town planner or someone speak to this at town meeting?
So this matter is currently before the planning board, and the planning board asked the petitioners for a variety of surveys, paperwork, and things of that nature. So this matter is going to be heard on the 10th. So we may get an update. I would suggest you defer to the petitioner, because they may request to remove this because they're not in a position to make the enhancements that's required by a vote of the planning board. We don't know the position of the planning board yet.
Okay, thank you.
Motion to defer to the petitioner.
Motion to defer,
Second?
and a second, all in favor? Aye. Article 4, to see if the town meeting will vote to amend Article 12 of the May 2nd, 2023 annual town meeting so as to increase the Medicaid reimbursement amount approved for fiscal year 2024 from $125,000 to $140,000 from Medicaid receipts within the general fund revenues to better align with actual and anticipated general fund revenues to the Auburn School Department operating budget for fiscal year 2024, to fund supplies and medical, therapeutic, and educational services for significantly disabled special needs students, as well as tuition and transportation to and from outside placements or within the district for special needs students, or act on anything relative thereto by the Auburn School Committee.
Mr. Chairman, first, I just want to say the school department apologizes for not being here. They had a school committee meeting tonight, so they were unable to send a representative because the school business manager was required to be at tonight's meeting. I had a conversation with the superintendent today. I don't know if you saw the explanation that they provided. No. But anyway, what I can tell you is, based upon actual receipts for prior fiscal year and the eligibility deemed for the current fiscal year, they're confident that they're going to receive $140,000 of revenue. So that's why typically an amendment such as this is made based on prior year receipts, just like we adjust our local receipts. They believe that they're going to receive $140,000.
Thank you. Any questions? Have a motion? I'm sorry, Steve, do you have one? No, that wasn't, that was just, okay. A motion?
Motion to recommend?
Second.
Motion to recommend and a second, all in favor? Aye. Article 5, to see if the town meeting will vote to appropriate the sum of $95,800 from free cash for the installation of new or the upgrade of security doors and windows at various schools within the Auburn School District, or act on anything relative thereto by the Auburn School Committee. Do you have anything?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Joe Fahey and the school superintendent had a security risk assessment done, which identified some concerning issues. So I can tell you, I reviewed the audit. The audit is much greater than the 95.8, but this would be a priority, and they're going to try to address some of those other enhancements and upgrades through the CIP in future years. But this is going to be a multi-year approach, but this is the most concerning, the main entrances. They want to, in light of everything that's going on across the country, they want to make sure that our school children are well protected.
Thank you. Any questions? A motion?
Motion.
Go ahead.
Motion to recommend?
A motion?
Second.
And second, all in favor? Aye.
Opposed?
You're opposed? Okay. We have one opposition. Okay, Article 6, to see if the town meeting will vote to repurpose CIP funds by amending Article 4 for the school department capital improvement budget for fiscal year 2021, approved at the June 2nd, 2020 annual town meeting, and borrowed in the fall of 2022. I'm not going to read the account numbers. It's available online if you need to read it. So as to appropriate the balance of $30,000 from the original appropriation of $230,000 for the Bryn Mawr parking lot expansion, and repurpose said balance of $30,000 to the central office administration building for window replacement and building upgrades, or act on anything relative thereto. Auburn School Committee. Does town manager have any information on?
Says, with the assistance of the Auburn DPW and the school department was able to complete the Bryn Mawr School parking lot expansion project. With funds remaining, it would like to repurpose this $30,000 to the central admin building for needed replacement of windows and building upgrades, and we respectfully request your approval of this article.
Thank you. Questions? Myself, I do have a concern on this one, only because of the uncertainty as to that West Street property relative to possible use for public safety at some point. So I have a concern of utilizing $30,000, even though just from being in the building and from the exterior, you can tell the windows are in dire need of replacement. But I know there's some other articles on here relative to seeing what the voters of the town, whether they have an interest in pursuing potential public safety building initiatives. So personally, I have some concerns relative to to expending this money at this time. It's been on the books for a while, and I think it would be best suited to stay on the books until we get some direction at this fall town meeting. But that's just my sort of feeling on it.
If I could just comment on that, I think that the school department has been put on a, they put this on hold, awaiting the outcome of the public safety facility. I think when there was a joint meeting, and then the Board of Selectmen took a position that they would not pursue the joint public safety facility, and now that there was more of a focus on fire headquarters at that site, allowed this building to stay in place, at least for the initial headquarters, with a compartmentalized approach in future years adding on to the building, which would carry it out quite a while. That being said, I think there's a refocus on the windows now to address some of the energy needs and the money that they're spending to keep that building warm. Beyond that, I can't comment anymore. I'm kind of just speculating that that was their approach.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions?
I just want
Mr.
to...
Chairman?
Chief Coleman?
So I just wanted to reiterate the point that the town manager made. The current plan, as we pursue the fire station only, is going to call for the demolition of the right portion of the building, which would leave the school department portion intact. So I certainly understand the concern that you have. It's been the same approach that we've taken with both fire stations, over this 5-year period as we've deferred capital expenses. But the way that the current plan sits now, that building will be in place, and I would have to think for many years to come until there's a plan to replace that building.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to point out that I noticed that article earlier, and the reason why I opposed the prior one is because I would have liked to have seen Article 4 be, which is, we're just speaking out support or not, but I would have liked to have seen Article 4 be $30,000 less, and then maybe it put this on hold. I just want to point out that with the size of the budget that the school has relative to the size of the city budget or the town, that, there's quite a bit of money, and now instead of looking for $65,800, the income combination, they're looking for $125,000. So for me, it's just a matter of prioritization. We have many, many, many departments within the town that we have to administer, and, $125,000 can go a long way in another department. So I just wanted to, comment that I'm not completely against these two articles, but that I would have been better off maybe prioritizing 4 or 5 and coming up with maybe making 4 a little less and using some of the, I appreciate that they're finding some money in another area, and they want to appropriate the balance. But again, I'm not going to support this because I would have liked to have seen 4 and 5 combined in one choice rather than 2.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, 5 and 6, is that what you're referring?
I'm sorry, 5 and 6. Thank you for clarifying, yes. Right.
Any other questions or comments on this one? Do you have a motion?
Motion to recommend approval.
We have a motion to recommend. Do we have a second? We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
We have 2 in favor. I'm against on this one. Anybody? 1, 2 noes? How many noes? We have 4 noes on it. Do we have to,
So it doesn't follow, we have to make a motion to not recommend or
you have to make a motion to not recommend, right? So so that motion failed. Do we have a
motion to not recommend.
we have a motion not recommend? Do we have a second? I have a second on the not recommend. All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
4 in favor, 2 against?
2 against.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Article 7, to see if the town meeting will vote to appropriate, I'm sorry, can someone in the back hit one of the air conditioners? I think we're all going to start, I know it keeps it a little bit quieter, but it's starting to get warm in here. Thank you. Back to Article 7, to see if the town meeting will vote to appropriate $5,250 from general fund revenues for firewall security review or act on anything relative thereto by the IT director.
Motion to recommend approval.
We have a motion to recommend, a second on, do we have a second on that motion?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Article 8, to see if the town meeting will vote to repurpose $90,000 from the ambulance reserve for appropriations account by amending Article 4 of the May 3rd, 2022 town meeting, replace ambulance as follows. 1, to appropriate $15,000 for personal protective equipment / turnout gear for firefighters, and 2, to appropriate $75,000 to replace garage doors at fire headquarters or act on anything relative thereto by the fire chief. Chief Coleman, did you want to comment on this one?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This $100,000 of available funds, $90,000 of available funds, this was for the ambulance that was voted to be purchased that is now being replaced by the donation from the Auburn resident. So that's why the funds were available. This ambulance was never purchased. We had utilized last year a portion of that money to fund the fleet mechanic position, along with some fleet maintenance equipment for the DPW. So this is the balance of that, what was an original $300,000 post. I have a question. Did the committee happen to receive in their email today the letter that is going out to town meeting relative to my 3 warrant articles? Did you receive that?
Chief, we did get the letter, but for some of us, came into our email today and didn't get a chance to thoroughly examine it, so if you can
Yeah,
get
so
the highlights of that, that'd be great.
I'll give you the Reader's Digest version because that letter that will be going to town meeting provides a lot of detail to these funds. But the short of it is, on the PPP, the PPE side, our turnout gear is tested annually. It has a 10-year life expectancy. And this year, during our annual inspection, we lost several sets of gear that were between 7 to 10 years old. So this $15,000, along with a $50,000 earmark from the state, those funds combined will be replacing the sets of gear that we lost during this year's inspection.
Any questions for the chief on this one? Chief, I just do have a question relative to how old are those garage doors? Again, I have less of a concern on the garage doors for Auburn Street only because, the joint meeting we had with the select board and the school committee and finance, it was clear that the focus and priorities, I think Mr. Marshall said, thank you, that when he posed the question as to what would be our priorities, clearly the West Street Fire Station is the priority when it comes to public safety buildings in town. So I have less of a concern knowing that the Auburn Street facility is going to be in use for at least a longer period of time. Can you just explain the amounts for those garage doors?
Sure. So as outlined in the letter that you have, these doors were actually slated in the CIP somewhere around 2016 or 17, and it was actually removed when we started the public safety facility discussion. So it was really intended that these doors were going to be replaced, probably around 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. The doors that are on the building are currently 40 years old. The problem, those doors are up and down every day. But some of the openers have been, not the openers, the actual push buttons on the wall, some have been replaced. Some are the original openers from 1964. The tracks are failing. We do preventative maintenance on the doors on an annual basis. But some of those openers are, between 25 and 30 years old. So at this point, we're kind of like piecemealing the openers, the tracks. 2 of the doors, they have used parts from an old door that the garage door guy had in order to kind of put a door back together. So it's time. So this $75,000, which has actually escalated quite a bit since 2017, this project was somewhere around $40,000 back then. This will replace all 6 garage doors at the station with new track, new openers, and new electrical devices in the wall for the push button.
Thank you. Any additional questions?
I have a sort of a separate question, which is related to Article 10. Is the assumption that the only place we can build is West Street, or is this still an open question? Because my question, if we're going to fix what we're going to retire soon, hopefully, if we're building a new station, or is the plan to still keep Auburn Street?
I'll let the town manager take as to where we are with the...
We put out a bid twice for anyone interested in selling property to the town for purposes of constructing a joint public safety facility. No one bid. As a result of that, we looked at property that we owned on West Street as a potential for a joint facility. That site was picked, albeit the joint facility is now we're now refocusing on fire headquarters only. But because it's on the west side of town, we have to maintain a presence here on Auburn Street. So we can't abandon Auburn Street because we wouldn't have the response times adequate enough to meet the required standard is set by federal standards. So, right now, we're focusing on West Street, but we have to maintain what we have on Auburn Street.
I guess my second, since you brought this up, we know nobody wants to sell, and I know that was sort of the decision of the committee early on, not to take anything by eminent domain or whatever processes. The thing I'm most worried about for the town is, the police station. We squeezed the spot out of the spot we owned, and then it became inadequate relatively quickly for the operation. And I'm just, because Article 10 is about $100,000 to look at West Street. I would much prefer to spend $100,000 looking for anywhere else but West Street, because there is plenty of land here that's unused. It's in somebody's hands, I realized. Chuck's Steakhouse is for sale. I mean, there is land around that's unused, Yankee Drama, the Sears Auto. I mean, it's better to do it right the first time and not do it twice.
So the owner of Yankee Drummer has no interest in selling the property. That would require an eminent domain taking, and that could get tied up in the courts for some period of time, which would only elevate the cost of construction as the longer you wait. So there is a cost. Not only, there's a liability cost to the taxpayers of the community by taking a piece of property through a pro tanto taking, and then have that value challenged in Superior Court, and then we'd have to pay potentially damages and additional sum of money. Secondly, the time you're waiting for that decision to be made, you're delaying the construction and the increase in cost. Chief, it's going up by an average of 5 to 7% a year?
Yeah, it was higher, but it's down to 7% now.
We know that's going to fluctuate because, but my question, though, is it still makes sense to build the best thing in the best spot and not have to redo it at any point in the near future. So, I mean, when you say I understand nobody wants their land taken by eminent domain. Maybe it'll push people to be a little bit more open to it if it's a threat. If you're just asking, they're going to say no because they can sit on it forever if they've got deep enough pockets. But it would be better for the town to have a bigger lot and not try to squeeze it in. And so my question is, how bad is the cost to do this? How long does it normally take? I understand that, the guy can countersue for, forever if he wants to, I guess. But at some point...
Well, first of all, I don't think that's something we consider unless we got voter approval to do it. There's two things. One, you can have an eminent domain taking, but does it make sense to do that if you don't know you got approval to construct the building? So there's
Have
really,
that same problem with
you
West
almost
Side
have to
Hotel.
tie it together. You almost have to have a debt exclusion vote that will allow you to raise a sum of money through outside of the levy, outside of the limit, for acquisition of land as well as construction. And so if we acquire the land through a pro tanto taking, that's going to take a period of time, which may skew estimates on the construction portion of the vote. And then if you don't have enough money, you can't make an award.
But we'd have the same problem if they said yes, wouldn't we?
You'd have the same what?
If they said yes to selling the property, we would still have some of those problems. The town still would have to agree to the debt exclusion, pass, you know what I mean? Like, you're going to still have some of those things. But since we know Chuck's is for sale, would that not be an adequate site? And it's between 12 and 20.
First of all, Chuck's is for sale. There's a bid out there now due on October 17th, we're not in a position to make a bid because we don't have authorization to do so.
That's what we're here for. I mean, is that not a better site?
No, that would be a great site. Unfortunately, we don't have authorization. I wouldn't ask for authorization without voter approval because it just,
But that's my point. But if Yankee Drummer had said yes, we would still also have to get the...
yes.
So we have a yes, we still have to do the authorization either way. So why wouldn't we, instead of spending $100,000...
No, it would
squeeze it
require,
into West Street?
it would require a vote of the voters, and it would require a vote of town meeting to authorize the borrowing.
Mr. Chairman?
To add to that really quickly, we also own West Street, so like, in addition to the cost of buying additional property, like, West Street is, we own it, there's no additional cost. My anecdotal understanding of the price of Chuck's is that it's several $1 million at minimum. The Yankee Drummer property, my understanding was that was, someone at some point floated like a $10 million plus ridiculous property value. Like, we own West Street. So unless we're going to add $6 to $10 to $15 to $20 million to acquire property and then also build the building, which we couldn't even get people to get on board with on West Street, which was the cheapest site, I don't know how we, like, I agree with you. In an ideal world, we would take a property and we would build, like, I'm all for the public safety building. I'm genuinely upset that this didn't go forward in the first place. But that said, it didn't go forward. And we need a new fire station because we're operating on a auditorium / cafeteria in an old school building and a building that was built, was it 70 plus years ago?
I don't disagree with the
Yeah.
need for the facility.
We gotta be realistic.
My question is only whether, if we, it's gonna cost a lot of money, it's gonna have to get approved by the voters either way. It may not happen today, it may not happen for 5 years, but do we really want to spend $100,000 on West Street when we still may get a no from the voters? But wouldn't it make more sense to have a better site that people would be much more confident about than...
But we'd have to get
Chairman?
approval from the voters just to get the site.
You'd have to get a smaller bite. And
Yeah, I mean,
and we'd be running these doors for another, 10 years or whatever. But the thing is we would be
Either
in
way-
a better position to have a better facility at a better location.
either way, we still need to approve it, like the voters to approve
I
the
know.
expenditure.
I
So like,
understand
we
what-
can either
I
ask
know
for
I'm
6 million
asking
now
a lot.
or 80 million later, and there's no guarantee we get yes to either one of them. My understanding is, despite the fact that like West Street wasn't the ideal site, it was, and I don't know what's happening. Despite the fact that West Street wasn't the ideal site, it was good enough to build a full public safety facility. This is a smaller ask. It doesn't require the knockdown of the whole building. We're going to be able to continue to use school administration. Like, I don't know, unless people turn it around in this town and decide that they're going to spend money to go all out and buy Chucks, I don't know what we do.
Yeah, while we're,
Mr.
the chief
Chairman?
wanted to comment, while, a little bit out of order, but we'll cover all the articles. Why don't we, Chief, can you just discuss what the $100,000 for Article 10, that conceptual
Well, that,
design
actually,
is going to cover?
that was going to be my point. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss something. Are we still on Article 8?
We're still on
Yes.
8.
On
We're
8,
We'll
but
ta-
10
we'll-
impacts
We'll
it.
take the motion on that momentarily, but while the discussion's been brought up for 10, can you just discuss what the $100,000 is so we can breeze by that when we get to it?
Well, 10 does, I just heard somebody say 10 impacts 8. In my opinion, 10 does not impact 8. It doesn't matter where we build a fire station out at West Street. The Auburn Street Fire Station is going to remain a fire station. These doors are to be installed at 47 Auburn Street, not out in West End. So it doesn't matter whether we're at Chuck's or West Street or on Halligan's property. It doesn't matter. The doors at fire headquarters, which will remain a fire station, is going to be a fire station.
Why don't we cover,
Motion to, can we make a motion for 8?
make a motion for 8?
Great, motion to recommend.
There's no other questions. Steve, I mean, there's a lot to this, and I understand I chaired that committee, and there's a lot to it, and your questions are valid, and I don't think anybody on this committee wants to throw, put something someplace and the sins of the police station and, being put onto smaller parcel. I understand all those concerns. They're all valid concerns, but why don't we get through this, and there's gonna be more discussion of this coming up in the future. I'm sorry, we have a motion.
Recommend.
We have a motion to recommend. Do we have a second? Motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Article 9. To see if town meeting will vote to appropriate the sum of $208,468.81 from bond premium proceeds and $255,531.19 from free cash for radio infrastructure equipment and improvements to the town's public safety communication system or act on anything relative thereto. Deputy Chief, do you have this one, or is it the Fire Chief that's going to discuss this?
The fire chief's probably more knowledgeable, I've attended a few meetings, but he's definitely more knowledgeable on the radio system than I am.
Chief, do you want to give us the...
I couldn't hear him, but I'm assuming he pointed at
He
me.
punted, sir. He punted right to you.
So again, I do give you a Reader's Digest version as well as the town meeting members in this document that will be mailed to them in the packet. The very short version is on July 22nd of this year, we had a catastrophic power failure at our main radio site on Rochdale Street. There's an underground conduit that goes from Rochdale Street to the radio site that's about 900 feet long. There was a breach in that conduit that filled with water, and it knocked the power out to that site. National Grid came out. For obvious reasons, they would not turn the power back on to the site until a new underground conduit was installed. The problem is the town does not own the property on the ground that the conduit sits in. So when we did the cost-benefit analysis on replacing the 900 feet of underground conduit, we had to take into consideration the construction of a new road on town-owned property to do that. The long and the short of it is that was far too expensive, and the cheaper option and the ultimate decision in consultation with our radio consultant was we abandoned the Rochdale Street radio site. But that meant we had to move all of our equipment from Rochdale Street over to Leicester Street, which was already serving as a backup site for the police, but the fire department had no radio equipment at that site. It took 4 weeks to move that equipment from Rochdale to Leicester Street. In the meantime, the Rochdale Street site was operating on generator power, which was a short-term solution at best. But we hustled to the best we could to get the main radio equipment over to Leicester Street. We moved some backup equipment to the town hall. And we were able to improve some radio coverage by moving from Rochdale Street to the Leicester site. We actually, on the fire side, police has pretty much remained the same. They've always had very good coverage. Our coverage was not so great. We have a much different system than police. But we were able to improve our coverage by moving from Rochdale to Leicester Street. And again, it's very technical, and I don't want to get into the weeds because it is a very complicated topic, but a portion of this money is to, let me just look at the numbers real quick here because I did outline them in this letter. About we'll call it 107,500 is to for the emergency repair over the course of that 4 weeks to build out the new Leicester Street site as the main repeater site. So there's a bill of about 107,500. As part of this, we're requesting, in order to improve the coverage, although we did gain some coverage by moving from Rochdale to Leicester in their CIP. Again, our site's different. We have a single site, whereas the police department has 5 sites. They work on a 5-site voter system. We work on a single site repeater with a backup repeater. I was trying to build out a 2-site, what they call a simulcast system. With supply chain issues and cost escalation, it's affected everything, as we all know in our lives. So this radio project that was originally slated for fiscal '20 has had several years of delays because due to escalation for the existing radio project that is currently within CIP. So those three issues is how we get to the 464,000.
Thank you. Questions? Patrick?
Actually, to the town manager, because this says, more the regulatory part of this, because it's a bond premium proceed, is this part of a borrowing, as the chief suggests, that goes back 5 years, that we don't have to pay down the debt? Or we can actually reallocate towards an equipment
Yes,
expense?
before the law changed, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
If we were to get insurance money, the cost to construct that road, the insurance would not cover the road. The insurance would cover essentially the repair of the conduit. So the town would still be outlaying a portion of money that's outside of insurance. And that number was way too high. And we actually have better radio coverage by abandoning the Rochdale site than, probably sinking somewhere about $300,000 just to construct a road.
Any additional questions? We have a motion?
Motion to recommend?
A motion, do you have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second, all in favor? Aye. Okay, Article 9. Article 10, to see if the town meeting will vote to appropriate $100,000 from free cash for conceptual designs of a proposed fire station on West Street, or act on anything relative thereto, by the town manager and the fire chief. Mr. Kazanovich, do you want to cover
So
what
this
the...
is just what we've been talking about the entire evening. So this refocuses our efforts to look at fire headquarters only on West Street, and this conceptual design appropriation will allow Tecton to redesign based upon fire headquarters only, and come up with a cost estimate that we could then consider and bring to the voters of the community.
Thank you. Patrick?
Just one question. If we go through with this design cost, and let's say it comes to fruition, can we recoup the money back through the cost of the project, or will we consider that when we go to borrow?
I don't think we would want to do that because we have free cash now. I don't know why we would want to recoup it and replenish free cash.
Well, just it might be more prudent in a premium or something if we were to borrow and then maybe be able to take it back. Just curious.
So
Sometimes
think
design costs, when they go out to bond, they pull in other expenses to offset, I realize we have a healthy free cash, but if the opportunity to borrow and include additional costs like this and not burden the taxpayer, that's more where I was coming from. But I guess if we're borrowing and we're transferring the costs, we're still burdening the taxpayer. Okay.
Steve?
You probably don't know the answer, but the State House was talking at some point about funding public safety buildings. I don't know if that's had any motion or...
So I think the chief could speak on that because he testified before the legislature or subcommittee relative to this consideration. Chief, you don't know what the outcome of your testimony in the effort to provide state dollars for public safety facility construction or fire only?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Manager. So as the manager said, I've testified before the Senate on 3 separate occasions, most recently within the last, I think, 30 days on this House bill. So what the bill would establish a building authority, a public safety building authority, very similar to the state's MSBA program for the construction of schools. So it would call for a 50% reimbursement to those communities eligible, through the same application process as MSBA. The funding source on the state side is marijuana. So that would be the funding source. So, I don't have any information relative to where this sits within the Senate. But I can just say that in the 3 times that I've testified, it has a lot of support from both sides of the aisle. We are hopeful that they will deal with it in this legislative session. But but we don't know. It was before them in the last legislative session, and it wasn't dealt with. So we're hoping that it's dealt with in this legislative session. Everybody from lobbyists to, our legislative aides within the Fire Chiefs Association, the bill is getting a lot of good feedback. One of the things that I was happy to hear in this last session was Senator Timilty, who was the sponsor of this bill, had indicated that even if a municipality voted to move forward with a project, that would not make them ineligible to apply for grant funds. So even if the town approved a project, we would still have the ability to apply for the funds in order to be able to reduce the tax burden on our residents. So it's not, as I understand it through the senator, it's not a situation where, if this program isn't adopted before we approve a project, that does not mean that we would be excluded from applying. So I was actually happy to hear that that was their intent of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, what I'd also like to add is currently under MSBA, conceptual design is not an eligible cost, although architectural and design is, conceptual is not. So if it mirrors the eligibility requirements of MSBA, this $100,000 wouldn't qualify today anyway.
Thank you.
I just have one other question.
Yes.
The original design for the public safety building, I was under the understanding that it included both facilities, but it was also, I thought it was when it was presented that it had the ability to build just the fire station originally anyway. So I'm wondering what this actually, does this not duplicate what we've already done?
Chief, can you cover
it does
the
not.
difference in the design between
Yeah,
the original conceptual?
Yeah, I can speak to that.
Thank you.
So the original, this is not a duplication of efforts. Although the fire station, like the apparatus portion, was kind of a standalone piece, there was a lot of shared spaces between the police and fire, including not only the spaces, but including mechanical. So it's not as simple to say, well, we're gonna scrap the police out of this project, so we just take the erase and all the, the police parts of the conceptual design, because the look of the building is gonna change, the layout of spaces is going to change, because the police are no longer a factor in the project. So it can't just be, we're not in a position where we just say, well, we're just gonna cut the police out, we're gonna go with the old design. The old design doesn't work if the police are not there. So those functions, the building's going to be a little smaller. The footprint of the building's going to be smaller. So it's not apples to apples.
And is the
Mr. Chairman, the only other point that I want to make is, regardless of where it goes, although the article says West Street, it's because that's the direction we've been given at this point. Town administration is aware of the Chuck's property. We are waiting to see what comes on the 19th after their RFPs come back to see what's bid. That's not out of the equation, but it's also not anything that we've really talked about seriously, because as the town manager said, we don't have authorization to pursue that property, and we don't have an authorization to bid on that property. So that's not a possibility at this time. However, the fire station is going to be designed on the West Street property with the square footage, whatever it is. The reality is that there are no significant elevation concerns or property concerns on West Street, that the way that this building is going to be designed, it's essentially being designed on a flat piece of property. It really doesn't matter where that building goes. You could pick that same building up and move it to Chuck's or move it to another location, because that's, I guess, the nice thing about the way that we're doing this is we don't have elevation concerns. It's not like we're building this into a hill. We're not going to need retaining walls to hold certain things. So the reality is that when the conceptual designs of this building, if in fact another piece of property were to become available, it would be very easy to use the same conceptual design and move it from one piece of property to another, because we don't have those environmental or, topography type issues. So to me, although it says West Street, I guess anything is up for debate, but that really doesn't have an issue in terms of what the conceptual designs of this building is going to look like.
So Chief, that article could just as easily say in West Auburn, fire station in West Auburn, as opposed to
You are correct.
specific, okay.
You are correct.
Any additional? Okay. We have, on Article 10, we have a motion to recommend. Do we have a second? And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Article 11, Deputy Chief, you want to come up so we can? To see if the town meeting will vote to appropriate $11,000 from general fund revenues to cover costs associated with the first year of the implementation process for police department accreditation through the Massachusetts Police Accreditation Commission, or act on anything relative thereto, brought up by the police chief. Deputy Chief, can you discuss to the committee what accreditation is and what,
So in Massachusetts, the accreditation program is just to ensure that you have the best available policies, for the industry standards, and that you are employing those policies, you're living up to those policies, and it's a continual review of those policies and of all of your policies to make sure that you're doing things correctly and, as far as those standards go. The cost for the department, the size of ours, is $2,600 to just be in as part of the accreditation process, which starts with a self-assessment process and then into certification, then hopefully into full accreditation at some point. And there's, I believe, 251 standards, if I'm not mistaken. Some are optional, some are mandatory, depending on where you're at as far as building and, what programs you have or do not have specialty-wise. So the remainder of the cost is a software program called Power DMS or Power Policy that just makes the policies trackable and more easily updated for the entire staff. And we already undertook one policy review at the chief's direction, and we'll probably be doing another one this winter, assuming that we go forward with this, which is the plan at this point. The town manager, we had spoken with town administration, and moving forward into FY '25 and beyond, we'll incorporate these costs into our operations budget and not use, this method. But this was one of the chief's priorities for, when we sat down and talked about priorities for this year, this was one of the priorities beyond the body camera program.
any questions? Chief, just clarification point. So accreditation isn't just it's not necessarily a nice to have, there's standards, like the fire department deals with national fire standards. This is just the police equivalent, benefits better police services, as well as, and through the town manager, probably, claims against the department meeting accreditation standards is a layer of protection for the municipality as well.
I mean, I know in your other role that you're very familiar with accreditation and how that works, but it's basically gives you the most up-to-date, best practices for your industry, and it's, it is similar to the credentialing program that the fire department goes through. And it's, we all have policies, but this ensures that those policies are consistently reviewed and updated as needed, and that you remain not necessarily on the cutting edge, but definitely on the, the forward-thinking edge of things, so that you're constantly moving things forward. Theoretically, less lawsuits, more defensible, in those matters. There's potential insurance reduction costs and stuff, but initially we want, it's more of a professionalization, trying to take the department to that next level, hopefully.
Thank you. Roger?
It says here, to cover the costs associated with the first year of implementation. So my question is do we have an idea of what ongoing costs will be once it's implemented? Will it be in the general fund? Will it be part of their budget?
Like, we're going to incorporate it into the budget moving forward. And the
basically
cost will remain standard. The cost of the software might fluctuate, generally up, I'm
So
sure.
we're really looking at implementation costs and then it moving right into your operating budget? Great, just to clarify, thank you.
Any additional questions? You have a motion?
Motion to recommend.
Motion to recommend. Second? And a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, sir. Article 12, to see if the town meeting will vote to approve a revolving account for the Department of Development and Inspectional Services pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E and a half, for the purpose of collection of revenue generated by town-owned EV charging stations for operation and maintenance, expenditures not to exceed, and we don't have an amount listed. Mr. Town Manager, do we have an amount as of this date for this one?
I'll defer to
Okay.
Darlene.
I'll just continue on, and you can insert the amount annually. Report and budget shall be submitted annually to the Finance Committee. This revolving fund shall commence on passage and be in effect in all subsequent years as voted by town meeting. And further, that figure 1.0 of section 6.13 of the general bylaws be amended consistent with this article or act on anything relative thereto. It's brought forth by the Director of the Department of Development and Inspectional Services, Ms. Darlene Quill, who's before us today. You want to brief us on this one, and do you have an amount to go along with this warrant?
Good evening. So the proposed article, I am still working on what the amount not to exceed is. The charging station that we had installed this past summer is actually in the back of Town Hall. You may have seen it. It's a dual-port charging station, so that means that two cars can be charging at the same time. We had that installed, and we are getting a quarter per kilowatt hour. So we get a little bit of money that's generating from any cars that are charging with it. We've already had several cars, that we see using the station. We don't have an idea yet of how much money we're going to generate. We just started getting, I think we got the very first check, and it wasn't a lot. But as time goes on and more people become aware that the charging station is there, we expect more money to come in. What we're proposing is to take the money that we get from the charging station and put it towards the operation and maintenance for the charging station. So yearly, we know we have to have some software that has to, we have a software account that we have to use for the station, and that cost, it's that cost plus over time, if something goes on it, because it's all electrical and computerized. We just want to make sure that we can use the money that it's generating, thank you.
Sure.
In order to put towards the actual station. And over time, as we get more and more grants from the state, we'll probably be adding charging stations at, say, maybe the library or a senior center, other places in town that people might be able to use them. And one more thing, I just wanted to let you know, you may see it. Literally, we just got our first electric vehicle, a totally electric vehicle in the department. It's fabulous. It's a little Chevy Bolt, and it just went on the road yesterday. We got the plates on it. It's fabulous. It's in the back, if you'd like to take a look at it before you leave. And we're very excited about it.
Any questions relative?
I just have one, and I don't want to, for no other reason, I'm probably going to recommend that we take no position because you don't have a dollar figure at the moment for us to support. But my only other question is, since you brought up the electric vehicle we have, I would think that we're going to track that because we can't pay ourselves, but we're going to want to have some idea of what the charging costs will be as part of the budget to manage that.
Yes, thank you for the question. So
Sure.
we actually, for ourselves, we have a card that keeps track of that. So when the town has to charge up, which we did, we charged it up as soon as we got it, and so we have a card that keeps track of it. So, yay.
If I may, to help push this along, I think maybe we can put a value in it. Do we know what the cost of the installation of the charging station was? And maybe we can, because it's just gonna be for the repairs. Worst case scenario is replacing the whole unit.
Software, the,
So if we want to put a value of 25, not to exceed 25,000, that would be more than adequate enough. And we also have the opportunity to amend that up or down at a future town meeting.
I think that's a great idea.
okay, I can move that. I can, then, my only other question is, because it goes on and it says in subsequent years voted by, so every year you'll set a ceiling, or you'll have an idea of the expenditures, and the thought process is that the revenue generated should always exceed expenditures. We don't, which,
Right, you cannot deficit spend beyond what revenue is available in
right,
this account.
exactly, okay. Sure, I'll make a motion to recommend.
I'm going to suggest a value of 25,000.
Okay,
Right,
so,
yeah, so I'm sorry, I wrote 25,000, and so I would recommend it based on with the motion that it not exceed 25,000 for year one. Do I have to say for year one?
That would be a blanket, that's the annual
Like
amount.
annual
so-
number, okay, so we'll just say annual, not to exceed 25,000 annually.
okay, so we have a motion to recommend with the, adding the amount of $25,000 into the amount listed as in the warrant article, and
Second.
we have a second, all in favor? Aye. I think you have the next one too, right? Article 13, to see if town meeting will vote to appropriate $10,000 from general fund revenues to supplement previous appropriations to allow the Board of Health to conduct Household Hazardous Waste Collection Day in the spring of 2024, or act on anything relative thereto.
Motion to recommend.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, all in favor? Okay. Easy.
Thank you so much.
Sorry. Article 14, to see if the town meeting will vote to appropriate $51,000 from free cash for fiscal year 2025, assessor's revaluation, or act on anything relative thereto by the town assessor.
So, Mr. Chairman, this is for the certification year that we talked about earlier. So RRC comes in, they evaluate our personal property, that adds new growth in addition to normal construction growth. So this is requested, used to be every 5 years. Town meeting has seen something very similar to this over the past 3 years.
Any questions? Patrick?
Is personal property included in this number?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion to approve, recommend.
Motion, no other questions? Motion to recommend?
Second.
And a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Article 15, to see if town meeting will vote to appropriate $60,000 from Town of Auburn's fiscal 2024 general fund revenues for training, support, and services, or act on anything relative thereto by the town assessor's office.
Mr. Chairman, this is my understanding, and I wish Chief Assessor was here. This money is for a vision appraisal software update, which allows for cloud-based data storage and accessibility from Vision to access our files remotely. That would include training, the cost of upgrade, and the support cost as well on an annual basis.
Anybody have any questions?
Motion to recommend.
Motion to recommend, a second. All in favor? Article 16, to see if the town meeting will vote to repurpose funds by amending Article 9, approved at the October 24th, 2017 special town meeting, so as to appropriate the balance of the original appropriation of $100,000 for, and again, I'm going to skip the account numbers, LED street lights, and repurpose said balance of $100,000 to sidewalk pedestrian safety for the creation of a new municipal sidewalk program that prioritizes access and safety of pedestrians by installing new sidewalks, including but not limited to the expansion, repair, and replacement of existing sidewalks and signalization, or act on anything relative thereto. This is by the town manager, but if you yourself.
So I don't know if you've been following the Board of Selectmen's meetings, but they've made this a priority. And as part of my goal, I was going to initiate a new sidewalk program. This is the start of that. So, like under Article 2, we made a request as a permanent infusion in the operating budget, a $50,000 request to address our existing sidewalks. This would be a startup cost as well, to address sidewalks throughout town that need repair, that need upgrading, that need replacement. And so we plan on building through 1/10 of 2.5 into our CIP, a line item in future years that would contain $100,000 for sidewalks. That would be a permanent appropriation that would allow us to address pedestrian safety throughout town.
I have a question. I think it's likely for Joanna, but what are our, like, I don't know if we call them policies or just what level of maintenance and sort of like cleanup is the town supposed to be doing to existing sidewalks? Because I'm all for like walkability and improving the way to get around the town, but my issue is that we have a lot of sidewalks now that like you literally can't walk on because of overgrowth. And I understand that not all of them are on like town-owned land, and theoretically property owners are responsible for some of that probably, but no one seems to be enforcing it. And so we talk about walkability, but there's like sections of 20 and 12 where you have to walk in the road because otherwise you're walking through brambles. And I'm just genuinely curious, like, are property owners responsible? Is the town responsible? Like, who's responsible for maintaining, clearing, and making sure that they're actually walkable now?
Currently, the DPW is responsible for the majority of the sidewalks, including, I believe, the majority of the sidewalks on state roads. So,
You said the department is?
I'm sorry?
You said the department?
Yes, the DPW. So if anybody does have any issues with overgrowth, I know that this is, we've had plenty of rain to let things, to water the plants this year, so we've had several phone calls about clearing brush off of sidewalks or streets. So anytime that anybody calls about that, we go out there. Sometimes we're not aware of that, those locations, but yes, we do clear we do brush cut. In the winter, we snow plow the roadways and the sidewalks.
Additionally, I'd like the Finance Committee to know that the Board of Selectmen supported through a use of ARPA funds to have CMRPC do a sidewalk survey and priority list for us, and that's currently underway. So that's going to help us identify where the need is, where we need to focus on first, hopefully provide an estimate of cost, and lay out a permanent software application that allows us to keep pace with that.
I had a question on that, the selectmen's meeting. I think somebody was talking about Bryn Mawr and the bridge, and it was, the state owned it and all the other stuff. But what I'm trying to figure out is, how far does $100,000 go? It's like, how big a job would that be, ballpark? Or like, you know, like, we're going to put money aside, which is great, but how far does it go? Like, how big a job is?
I'll let the DPW director answer that, but let me tell, it all depends on whether we're reconstructing the road and doing the sidewalk at the same time. I think if you do the sidewalk as not part of a larger project, you're probably going to pay more. It also depends on the condition, what you need to do, whether or not it's going to require any easements or land taking. So there's a lot that comes into play, condition, and whether it's tied into a reconstruction project. Because if they're there anyway, you're probably going to pay less.
Additional questions?
I think the town manager pretty much covered it. It just depends on the road. The reconstruction of the sidewalks is certainly a lot cheaper, just because you already have a base and you already have the real estate to put the sidewalk in. If we're looking at constructing new sidewalks, now you're looking at making sure that you have the right-of-way, that you have the room for the sidewalk. You're putting a new base in, so you're starting from scratch. in addition to any stormwater mitigation that you might have to provide.
It also depends on the curbing type, whether it's granite, whether it's berm, whether, yeah.
But I'm just wondering, if, like, how quickly people would see it, you know? I mean, it's on the budget, but, and there's a project that you're, running, but...
You know, I just want to add to some insight that I have that I learned a couple of years ago. I want to point out to the board that the materials that are being used to do our roads and to do our sidewalks and so forth are not the kind of materials they even used a couple of decades ago. And with the amount of traffic and the amount of volume that goes on our streets and our roadways, we're actually seeing a diminishing return, because even though we're having several things paved and new roads, the amount of traffic has increased, the quality of the roads are not the same. I won't say, it to be positive or negative, but I will say the cost of keep up and repair just on our highways and roads is becoming astronomical. It's 100, I don't want to speak on behalf to directly answer your question, but I know that we're not getting $100,000 worth today as we may have gotten a decade ago. And part of it is because the materials they're using just don't support the circumstance as well as they used to. I just wanted to make that observation.
Just a quick comment for myself. So DPW currently has, or a strategic plan relative to repaving all roadways within the town, and I forget the time frame. Was it 15? I think this was with your predecessor, was it 15 or 20? 20 years. A 20-year plan that all, and I know we sort of maybe fell off a little bit in the COVID years, but there is a plan, and usually as a part of that plan is sidewalk reconstruction, should it be needed. So just to clarify, this $100,000 account would probably more address areas that were more immediate attention that may not currently be on a schedule for a reconstruction. It's not really adding another $100,000 to that reconstruction plan. It would be more for something that had more of an emergent need. Am I interpreting that correctly? That you'd be able to address issues that would be a fund to address specific sidewalk issues outside of that 20-year strategic plan?
Right, so my intent would be to continue on, if we were doing a roadway and there's a sidewalk on it, we would continue to repave the sidewalk along with the roadway, but this would be on top, above and beyond if we're looking to address emergency or urgent repairs, or if there's a sidewalk that's, if there's a priority to put a new sidewalk in.
Thank you.
And because of these increasing costs, like Patrick identified, certainly, we've drawn attention to that before. This sidewalk money may be also used to supplement Chapter 90 in roadway reconstruction in order to get those sidewalks repaved or installed.
And these improvements go to not only walkability, but accessibility issues that if someone were really to push that issue with the town, we could be looking at a bigger project than addressing it in $100,000 chunks over the course of year after year. So the new construction include all the accessibility grades and I don't know what the traction areas for wheelchairs that goes up and the coloring, so, okay. Thank you. Anybody else?
I just had a general question, because you said that we're responsible for the sidewalks on state highways, and there's certainly parts of Route 20 that have no sidewalk. Is that like a normal thing?
It depends on how the roadway was constructed. If there was accommodations that the town had asked for, that the DOT allowed us, paid for a sidewalk in a certain section, but we have certain areas, even landscaping, they would allow landscaping in certain sections, in medians, as long as the town maintains them. So it just depends on the situation.
Any other questions? Do we have a motion on this one?
I'd make a motion to recommend.
We have a motion to recommend, and a second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Article 17, to see if the town meeting will vote to appropriate $500,000 from free cash to the town OPEB, other post-employment benefits, liability trust fund, or act on anything relative thereto. Any questions? Town meeting.
Motion to recommend?
Okay, we have a Motion to recommend?
Second.
And a second, all in favor? Article 18, to see if the town meeting will vote to appropriate $100,000 from free cash to the town stabilization fund or act on anything relative thereto by the town manager. Any questions?
Second.
No questions? I have a motion to recommend and a second. All in favor? Article 19, to see if the town meeting will vote to appropriate $3,100 from the cemetery perpetual care account for the purchase of cemetery maintenance and funeral setup equipment or act on anything relative thereto by the DPW Director / Town Engineer. Any questions?
Motion to recommend?
And a second, all in favor? Aye. Article 20, to see if town meeting will vote to appropriate $80,000 from sewer retained earnings to procure services, equipment, and materials to repair the odor control system at the Pinrock wastewater pumping station or act on anything relative thereto by the DPW Director and the sewer superintendent. Any questions relative to this one for the DPW Director?
Motion to recommend?
Recommend and a second, all in favor? Aye. Article 21, to see if town meeting will vote to amend Article 13 of the October 26, 2021 special town meeting so as to repurpose the appropriation of $65,000 from retained earnings from the replacement of a fairway mower to purchase of a mower or act on anything relative thereto by the DPW Director. Could we just get some clarification? I think the way that's worded, it sounds like we're moving a mower to buy a mower. I don't know if anybody else was confused by that.
Changing the purpose.
The original article specified a fairway mower, and we're looking to have a little bit more flexibility in purchasing a mower that would cut the greens as well.
Any other questions for the DPW Director relative to the
Motion to recommend?
motion recommend?
Second.
And a second, all in favor? Aye. And finally, Article 22, to see if the town meeting will vote to amend the Town of Auburn general bylaws by deleting, I don't even know if this is one we have to act on, but I'll read it, deleting chapter, traffic orders, rules and regulations, special speed regulations, different streets, by the select board. Is this one that,
This is
A motion to,
zoning regulation, so I assume, yeah.
motion to defer to the petitioner?
okay, I have a motion to defer to the petitioner, do you have a second? A second, all in favor? Okay. No transfers, no minutes. Any other questions? Thank you to everybody for their patience. I think I went a little slower than my predecessor in the seat, but we have new members, and I'm new in this seat, so, but I think we got questions answered that need to be answered.
Yeah, for sure.
We have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
You want me to do the gavel now? Gotta do the gavel. Thank you, everybody.
Town meeting.
Okay, yeah, and just everybody, just a reminder for everybody, town meeting, the 24th, 6 PM at the high school auditorium, okay? Put that on your
Oh,
calendar.
what is the date of the town meeting?
Sam, you weren't listening to me.
I didn't hear it, because the mics are off.
October 24th.
October 24th?
Yes.
Okay.
There's no reason to meet right before, did they just...
I'm gonna reopen that, the one you declined of the $500 for the cupcakes.
Oh, yeah, are we, no, we're still on, we're not on, right? There's no cupcakes on here.
I
thought you were gonna bring up the cupcakes.
The entire town meeting.
As soon as I saw the volunteer thing, I thought for sure he's gonna bring up cupcakes. Patrick.
We're going, we didn't have to do, we can go right for 6:30, right, Sharon?
Go to
I mean, I'm gonna be there either way.
Oh, you have to be.